pretty much come in. But Jakari, tell us about this James O'Keefe piece, Project Veritas, and give us your take overall on this organization. Because I don't care whether you're a libertarian, a conservative, a Democrat, a Tory, whatever country you're in. This is real journalism. I mean, he just continues to have a huge effect doing simple, basic investigations and showing people with stunts what's really happening.
Or they just reveal their own lies. He just lets them talk.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like Okeefe. I've had a chance to interview him a few times. And every time I talk to him, I always ask him what's next. He never wants to tell me, and for good reason, because he's so controversial. In the report I had a chance to do with him the other day, one of the first things the lady says to him when he walks in, she says, "You look like James O'Keefe." So that tells you how big of an impact that he's having, that people who may not even be a regular follower of his will recognize him on the street. He's like, who's James O'Keefe? So it's a good deal. And I'm real happy to see Okeefe out there doing many things that he does, whether it's crossing the border, dressed up as Osama bin Laden, the things he did with Project Acorn, and now currently exposing the voter fraud, whether that's in North Carolina, some of the shenanigans here in the state of Texas with Battleground Texas, many other things that he's done as well. I think he's on the front line of investigative journalism. And sometimes it does put him in some hot water. He's been involved in some lawsuits and things like that. And I had a chance to ask him off camera. I said, do you expect any further lawsuits coming in the future? He says, it's inevitable. But that's what happens when you're out there on the front lines of journalism, going at it 100%. You get involved in those situations. And hopefully that, he can beat the rap and beat the ride if he ever encounters a situation like that again. But yeah, James, he has some great things to say, not only about his recent undercover investigations in North Carolina, but also touched on the Eric Holder situation. You guys remember he was offered the ballot for Eric Holder, the Attorney General, which is to say that, a public figure, somebody who's very much in the public light, saying that he wants to ban guns, brainwash people about guns, somebody who's so influential in his circle of influence. If he can be offered somebody else's ballot, what's to say about Joe Blow down the street, or, Bob Brown? Who's to say that he couldn't get those ballots just as easily? But it's a good report. Everybody should watch it. And it's coming up next.
That's right, Jakari. And, looking at all of this corruption, this is a system that's not been held accountable. So if somebody like James O'Keefe or Infowars just can go out and change the world, what could other people do? And it shows how controlled the corporate media is, that they just follow in lockstep. So let's go ahead and go to this report. Then we're going to come back and look at GMO labeling with Anthony Gucciardi, Rob Dew, and others. We also have a Greg Palast interview that Darren McBreen's done. We're going to look at illegal voting and the latest on that, election fraud, the Attorney General going after Texas. We're going to talk to Joe Biggs, and we're also going to look at the best of Okeefe with Obama. We're also going to look at transcending the system with David Knight. We got Gerald Celente coming up. We're going to have election results on the Texas gubernatorial race being watched so closely with Abbott. And, of course, Wendy, I Love to Kill Babies, Davis. That's all coming up tonight. So here's Jakari Jackson talking to James O'Keefe.
And welcome to Infowars, continuing coverage. Our topic of the hour, voter fraud. How easy is it to do? It is, in fact, quite easy, as our next guest will demonstrate, James O'Keefe. All right, it's good to see you again, James. The last time we talked, you were doing some reporting about the shenanigans going on in the state of Texas. Now it's my understanding that you've been out to some other areas as well. And I will say that the recent reporting you did is some of my favorite, because we've seen you play a pimp. It's probably the first time I was introduced to you. Then you played Osama bin Laden. Now, my favorite role is you playing a guy who looks like James O'Keefe. The lady in the video, she says, "Hey, you look like that guy James O'Keefe." And you say, "I've never heard of this guy." Let's go to this clip, and then we'll get your comment about it.
Thank you. Who'd you say I look like?
You look like James Okeefe.
Oh, that. I don't know who that is.
You have to find out.
I will.
I would take it.
Thank you. My twin?
Okay, James, so tell us where you are, what was going on, and what led you to this particular report.
We're in the area surrounding Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina, and we walked into these poll precinct locations and simply said the names of inactive voters, and they told us, they offered us ballots We did this a total of about 20 times, and everyone offered us a ballot except one, and that person asked to see my driver's license, which is against the rules. You're not allowed to ask for ID, but when they did ask for ID, I was unable to get a ballot. I was unable to get someone else's ballot. So we demonstrated that in-person voter fraud is possible. This comes on the heels of a report we did last week where a worker was fired, a campaign worker was fired for telling us to vote for non-citizens. And this comes 2 weeks after in Colorado, a worker was fired for telling us to go dumpster diving for ballots of African Americans to vote in their names. So we really have done a big series on voter fraud, and it's having an impact on these races.
Yeah, because they keep saying that, voter fraud, it can't happen. It's a foolproof system, or nigh foolproof, should I say. But, you demonstrated perfectly. You can go vote as people who are even deceased. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, anyone whose name is on the rolls, you could walk right up to the poll location, state their name, state their address, and you can get offered their ballot. You just have to sign the form. We didn't actually sign any forms because that would be a felony, but it is possible. There's 700,000 inactive voters. There's over 1,000 people in North Carolina who are registered to vote who are non-citizens. So this stuff is entirely possible, and the elections are so close, it could make a difference.
And when we talk about this voter fraud, it doesn't even have to be somebody who's necessarily not going to vote. Could it just be a circumstance where you get to the polls before they do?
Very, very well could be, and many people don't vote. In Colorado, in the mail-in ballots, almost half or 1/3 of those ballots are thrown away or discarded. And one of the officials in the video says, yeah, you should go fill those ballots out, fill in those mail-in ballots. All you got to do is check mark someone's name and forge their signature, and and congratulations, you're voting on somebody else's name. So it's possible. The Board of Elections is now investigating. It's really a simple ruse. We've done it before. We got offered Eric Holder's ballot 2 years ago. We went into Eric Holder's precinct and walked right up to the Attorney General where he votes. And the poll worker said, here you go, Mr. Holder. And of course, we weren't Eric Holder, but they assumed we were because there's no photo ID. And then after we did this, they actually had a picture of Eric Holder put on his poll location.
Are you serious?
So they instituted, they verified identity for Eric Holder, but nobody else.
Yeah, I remember that one. You guys were like, I'll be back faster than you could say furious. But, it just shows how easy this thing is to manipulate. And people would say, they try to criticize, say, well, you're showing people how to illegally vote. These people already know if they want to participate in these actions, how to do it. Because you don't, in the jurisdictions you're going to, you don't need a voter ID like you do here in the state of Texas. So let me ask you this. At any point, what surprised you the most? Was there a situation you said, well, no, we're not going to get away with it this time, or just something happened that you didn't expect to happen at all?
Well, the shock was, there's a couple of funny anecdotes. One time I was doing this in one of the areas, and I believe it was Durham or Cary, North Carolina, and I was standing right in front of a sheriff or a police officer, and he stood there right behind me as I was doing this ruse. Of course, I wasn't breaking any laws, but there's always the presumption they arrest you and ask questions later. And the police officer had his hands on the side of his body, and it looked like, I basically said to myself, well, I'm pretty much screwed. He's going to arrest me the moment I turn around. So I turn around, and I get offered this ballot, and I say, well, let me go out to the car, and I'll be back. That was my excuse for getting out of the location. And the officer looks at me, and I'm expecting him to put handcuffs. He literally just walked right by me and said, he just said, hey, he was voting. I thought he was there to, stop me from doing this ruse, but he was just there as a police officer voting. There was another anecdote where the woman in the video actually does say, I need to see your driver's license, and I did not expect that. That was the one thing I did not expect, was for them to break the rules and do the right thing, even though it was against the rules. And that's what stopped me from being able to get offered the ballot, was when she asked me for my ID.
Now, what's the rule that she broke? That just simply asking for a photo ID?
In North Carolina in 2014, you do not need to show a driver's license. And in some of the cases when we said, I would say, do you need to see my driver's license? They would, almost like when you show garlic to a vampire, they would jump back and say, no, I can't see your ID. I can't see your ID. So the notion that someone actually asked for ID is wrong. In the state of North Carolina, you're not allowed to do that. Many people think it's racist to ask for an ID card. I don't take a stance on it. I think it's silly that people say it's racist. But the bottom line is, you're not supposed to ask for ID in many of these states. But that is the only thing I have found that actually stops the fraud, that actually prevents me from getting offered the ballot.
Wow. James, I want to ask you about some of your other reports you filed this year. You've been covering the immigration front, and you and our very own Staff Sergeant Joe Biggs have had somewhat of a friendly competition, I understand, as far as, you know, who can get the biggest stunt to just show the lunacy of our open border situation. Can you tell us about the time you crossed the border dressed as Osama bin Laden?
Yeah, I mean, pretty straightforward. We went to Hotspeth County, Texas, where the Rio Grande is not exactly grand. It's just a tiny sliver of a river. It looks like a drainage ditch. We dressed up like Osama bin Laden, and we just walked right across, thus proving the absurdity that our borders are secure. No federal border patrol anywhere to be found. This prompted John McCain to interrogate the undersecretary for the Department of Homeland Security about why I was able to cross with no agents anywhere around. And the video got over 1 million views on YouTube. It went viral. It prompted a discussion about national security and border insecurity. And another instance of our public officials saying one thing about the reality of our world when, in fact, our borders are not secure. And everyone knows it to be true. So the only person that was shocked by it were our government officials.
Exactly, and I believe it was Representative Hunter. He disclosed on Fox News that they had, in fact, caught some ISIS terrorists coming across the border. Of course, this didn't make much rounds in the news cycle because we were talking about Ebola at the time. But, you know, that's another thing, Ebola. You know, what's your view on this Ebola situation?
Well, we did another video where we crossed from Canada to Lake Erie dressed like an ISIS guy with the black cloth around our face, and we had fake Ebola with us and ricin, and we crossed from Canada into the United States near Cleveland, thus proving that our borders were insecure in the north. And I think it's a problem when our government doesn't look out for the safety and protection of our citizens, and that's what our videos demonstrate, both on the Mexican border and on the Canadian border. We walked right on shore, and the Coast Guard said it's possible to do this. It's a problem, and you know, I don't know when people are going to wake up, but hopefully our videos shock people's conscience into doing something and demanding something of their leadership.
Yeah, that's true, because we definitely we get the shock value, but you know what happens after that? You know, we really wish people would, you know, wake up to these things, not say, oh, that's a funny video or he made a very interesting point, but you know, go to their local politicians, talk to whoever they need to, talk to your local border patrolman and say, you know, what's going on out here? Because we've been down to the Texas border multiple times, Texas-Mexico border, and you know, the border patrol, they'll stop you, you know, 100 miles from the Mexico border and want to search your car. You know, hey, what are you guys doing? Are you guys American citizens? Like, well, if you guys want to know where the illegals are crossing, I can show you some spots, Border Patrolman. We know exactly where they are, you know, where you can go get them. And then they told us that they were actually giving them travel vouchers. You know, they get caught in a catch-release program, and then they're given a bus ticket to pretty much any place in the continental USA, and then told to, you know, come back to their court date 3 years later. I'm getting a little bit off topic. And James, I know you never want to tell me what you got coming up, and for good reason, but as vague as possible, what's next for Project Veritas?
Well, I mean, we're focused on these election investigations. We just released one today where our staff is exhausted from pulling all-nighters for the last week, being in North Carolina. A campaign staffer was actually fired on Friday. This is from the Charlotte Observer in North Carolina, reports that the campaign manager actually resigned after our video showed him consulting us to vote for non-citizens. The Attorney General of North Carolina may investigate. The Board of Elections is investigating. Colorado worker was fired. So we've had enormous impact in these races. I mean, some of these states have actually, the polls have actually swung considerably after our investigations have come out. So, you know, this is a new type of reporting. It's an old type of reporting that has come to a new media world, and we're going to be doing a lot more of it. It sickens me to see all these statewide, you know, and national press doesn't even want to talk about it, but the local media does talk about it, which is great, but they're always attacking me and trying to defend the subject we investigate. So it's amazing. Not only do we have, you know, the sort of, it's half tragic, half comic, the absurdity of trying to break through their firewall, get the message out, circumvent the media, avoid the slander and defamation. But we held a press conference in Raleigh last week, and every single TV station